Let me emphasize once again, ladies and gentlemen, nature of the scientific evidence. The fossil record undoubtedly is powerful, positive evidence for creation. There is just simply no rational, scientific way to explain the sudden appearance of that multitude of very complex invertebrates without a trace of an intermediate form or an ancestor, or to explain that immense gap between the invertebrates and the fishes. The sudden appearance without a trace of an ancestor of all the different kinds of fishes simply demands creation. And entropy itself, the fact of entropy, everything in the natural universe tends to go in precisely the opposite direction that evolution requires. It absolutely shows that evolution could not take place. If you have machinery, if you've got an automobile, if you have photosynthesis, if you have the egg, sure, no problem. But you've got to explain the origin of those incredibly complex structures without using anything but raw destructive energy, and it cannot do it. All the evidence in the mathematics absolutely demands creation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me just state this. There are two explanations to explain our origin: a naturalistic, mechanistic, evolutionary theory, and the concept of direct spatial creation as a result of the deliberate action of an intelligent creator. That's the choice. Now, today in our public schools, our kids are being literally indoctrinated in evolutionary theory. In very few classrooms across this country today are the students being exposed to fallacies and weaknesses in evolutionary theory. They're certainly not having the opportunity that you are having today to hear the scientific case for creation. That's indoctrination, ladies and gentlemen, and it's depriving these young people of their academic and religious freedom. It's denying them the best education possible. It is denying them their basic rights to know and to develop their skills in science. You know, we shouldn't be teaching kids what to think. We ought to be teaching them how to think. And when you indoctrinate them in either creation or evolution, then you are telling them what to think and not how to think. And it's often stated, and the kids hear it, evolution is a fact, evolution is a fact, evolution is a fact. I don't know anything more dogmatic than that. And the implications are clear. Marjorie Green, a well-known philosopher and historian of science, certainly not a creationist as far as I know, she published an article in 1959 in which she said it is as a religion of science that Darwinism chiefly held and holds men's mind. And a humanist pamphlet published by the American Humanist Association, the leading atheist organization in the United States, says this: humanism is the belief that man shapes his own destiny. It is a constructive philosophy, a non-theistic religion. And on that same pamphlet they quote Sir Julian Huxley, who says, I use the word humanist to mean someone who believes that man is just as much a natural phenomenon as an animal or plant. That his body, mind, and soul were not supernaturally created, but are products of evolution. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the basic dogma of humanism in general. Now, again, let me make very clear, not all evolutionists are humanists or atheists, but this is the sort of religion that is being taught in our schools, and our schools are tax-supported in a pluralistic democratic society. Ladies and gentlemen, your money and my money supports these schools, and they ought to have academic freedom and the freedom to hear both points of view. And when that is possible, then you, the students, can make up your own mind and decide what you believe to be more credible or more reasonable creation or evolution. As for myself, I am convinced, again, in the beginning, God created. Thank you very much.
We will now have 20 minutes for questions. If you have a question for Dr. Emsley, if you will proceed to the microphone on this side of the auditorium to my right. If you have a question for Dr. Gish, if you'll proceed to the auditorium on my left, your right. Roland, if you have a person ready with a question, I'm ready to proceed. Pardon?
Sir, you stated that there were two questions involved in evolution. One, has evolution taken place, and then how evolution happened. Since the has evolution taken place is a presumption, and since the explanation of different species from a common tree is not supported by the fossil record, isn't the how of evolution inseparable from the has of evolution? And since the how of evolution is in direct opposition to the second law of thermodynamics, which is a law without exception, is not the entire question of evolution impossible?
I'm wondering whether you came in late.
No, I did not.
The second law of thermodynamics has nothing whatever to do with it, because we have a supply of energy which can drive all chemical systems on Earth. It's coming in every day from the sun. If the sun went out, we're dead. Evolution stops, individual development stops. I agree. But while the sun is there, we have an energy source which can drive all these processes. You ask about the other part of the question, how? I start, indeed, from the assumption that evolution has in fact taken place. And Darwin, in 1859, after 30 years of cogitation, because he knew of the hostile atmosphere into which this book would be launched, and he was in fact a creationist before he went on his trip on the Beagle in 1837, he put forward natural selection, which was the first time a mechanism, sorry about the feedback, the first time a mechanism had been proposed by which evolution could have taken place. Now, the only matter of dispute today is whether Darwinism, in his elementary form, will take care of all present circumstances. And punctuated equilibrium, which is a modification proposed by Gould and Eldridge, is a way of getting round what appears to be an imperfection in the fossil record. And is someone keeping time? I have 2 minutes, so I don't see a timekeeper anywhere.
We will call time when
you will call time. I'll stop. Then the Eldridge-Gould idea is that small populations under different circumstances evolve quite rapidly, and then if they meet the original parent population again and win, what you will see is the parent population, and then you will see a new population taking its place without the interconnecting specimens, because the interconnecting specimens are very, very few in number, because they're a small population, not part of the larger one. And so you would expect to find then large populations, large, with gaps in between, and that's what we have.
Dr. Gish gets 1 minute.
Entropy certainly is a very, very large part of this problem. I agree that the energy from the sun will drive the living organisms and so forth if you have photosynthesis. Yes, that's true, but how did you get photosynthesis? How this incredibly complex machinery arise, and how did all that other metabolic machinery within the green plant arise? You've got to have it all. You can't. Why, energy from the sun is totally destructive. You and I lie around on the beach all day, we just get sunburned. We can't utilize it. You've got to have photosynthesis. Energy, raw, uncontrolled energy in itself is totally destructive. Now about these Darwinian explanation, let me read what Marjorie Green had to say. Let me emphasize again, she's an evolutionist. As far as I know, she's not a creationist. In this article published in Encounter, November of 1959, she says, quote, that the color of moths and snails or the bloom on the castor bean stem are, quote, explained, unquote, by mutation and natural selection is very likely. But how from single-celled, and for that matter from inanimate ancestors, there came to be castor beans and moths and snails, and how from these there emerged llamas and hedgehogs and lions and apes and men, that is a question which neo-Darwinian theory simply leaves unasked.
We will deduct the extra 30 seconds from Dr. Gish's next answer. The question for Dr. Gish, please.
I'm a paleontologist and an elder in my church, so I guess I'm one of those rare people that's both religious and scientific. And I've found that how...
No speeches, please, sir.
Okay, this relates. I found that how is a question that science is particularly good at asking. If you're proposing scientific creationism, you should have a how answer for how life was created. If you can't think of a theory, or, sorry, I haven't heard yet a theory, and I would like to hear one from you on exactly how God created life on the earth that we can test, one that we can put against the scientific theories that we've heard of evolution.
It seems to me that you want me to come up with a better theory of evolution. The creationist makes no pretense to do that. Even Carl Sagan would not do that. He was asked a question, or he asked himself the question, where did that cosmic egg come from in the first place that exploded and gave rise to the universe? He says, well, who knows? Maybe it came into being miraculously from nowhere. Okay, if that's a valid answer, then the creationist is that man came into being miraculously. And he was miraculously created by a supernatural creator. That's all we can say about it, except from the products that we have today. We have the products of either creation or evolution. And the products of evolution are going to be very, very different from the products of creation. And I think we can demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt the fossil record that we have is remarkably in accord with creation. It is what we would expect to find. Therefore, it does support the inference of creation rather than the inference of evolution. And the evolution, many of them say they don't know what the mechanism of evolution is today. Some of them say you don't even have to know what the mechanism is in order to know that evolution is a fact, quote unquote. So why would the creationist have to know how God created? If I knew that, I'd be God, and I'm not.
Well, Dr. Emsley has a minute.
I don't have very much to say, except that over at the University of Maryland, you have Professor Pomparuma with his graduate students, you have Sidney Fox in Florida, you have Eigen and Orgel. They have a whole lot of scientists in this country and elsewhere doing their very best to try and find out how the first living organisms could have arisen by a process of chemical evolution. And we are just touching the surface. And it would be premature to make any kind of statement. At the moment, we just don't know. But come back in 15 years.
A question for Dr. Emsley.
Dr. Emsley, does the theory of evolution imply that there is a scale or measure that places man at the top of this scale above all other creatures?
Would you repeat the question, please? Or somebody, Dr. Emsley, would you...
The question was, is man at the top of the evolutionary scale, or is there some kind of scale that we're at the top of? Is that a fair restatement?
That is correct, yes.
We are so egocentric, the answer is yes, because that's the way we draw the diagrams. If you were a house mouse or a cockroach, you would draw it differently, because they are also very successful. How do you measure biological success? Essentially by biomass and how much of the Earth's resources you can capture. We are capturing more of the Earth's resources than any other organism has ever done before, and maybe ever will. And so maybe by that measure, we should be at the top. But in actual fact, every single organism alive on Earth today is a success story in its own right. And if they were writing the text, they would draw the diagrams with themselves in the pinnacle position. So it's purely a subjective view, and it reflects the egocentricity of man. We think we're rather special. Maybe we are. Maybe we aren't.
You see, what Dr. Emsley is saying, in the evolutionary view, the only measure of success is survival. That's all. Just the fact that you survive. Well, the creationist view of reality and of man is extremely different than that. Man is vastly different than all other animals. The only one who can think abstractly, the only one who can plan for the future, the only one who has speech, and the only one that has any inclination to worship God and many, many other characteristics are unique to man, and to say the only difference between us and other creatures, the fact, or the similarities, I guess, is that we've all survived, for a while at least. Our survival seems to be in danger now. But man is uniquely different. There's no question about it, and I maintain he's uniquely different because he was created uniquely different.
A question for Dr. Gish.
Dr. Gish, if we're to take evolution as an attempt to answer the question of where we came from, and you're trying to substitute creationism as an alternative answer to this same question, why then do we have fossil records that are over 6,000 years old of these fishes and these invertebrates without the gaps? Why then would God just all of a sudden, poof, there's a bunch of invertebrates lying on the floor of the ocean? What is the point of that if man is supposed to be the ultimate of his creations? Why not just create man 4.5 million years ago, and then we wouldn't have this problem?
The explanation of what he's asking me for is an explanation of the so-called geological column, where we point out this Cambrian is supposed, these animals supposedly were fossilized beginning 600 million years ago, the fishes 100 million years later, and then amphibians, reptiles, and finally man. Well, the answer to that question can be given from several points of view as far as the creation is concerned. The evolutionist must have an immensely old earth. He has no choice in the matter. That's not true of the creation. He can choose to believe whatever the scientific evidence indicates, either an old earth or a young earth. Many of the creation scientists believe that the earth indeed is old, and they accept the geological column as it is generally portrayed, and believe in what is called progressive creation. Animals were created in stages with long intervals of time. That's called the progressive creationist view. Now there's another view of the recent creationists who believe that creation took place in a very short time span. And they interpret the evidence as being intertwined or involved in catastrophe, that the present is not the key to the past, that you cannot explain geology as a result of present processes acting essentially at present rate over vast stretches of time. But catastrophes were involved, and principally one vast aqueous catastrophe. And utilizing that sort of information, that sort of a notion, for example, Dr. Henry Morris, who had his doctorate in hydrology from the University of Minnesota, interprets that evidence the way the animals could have been destroyed, the way they could have been buried, the way they could have been fossilized as a result of catastrophic, rather than the creatures either evolving or having been created over vast stretches of time. Now there are several other explanations within the creationist model. So there are several ways to explain the data. Problems? Absolutely. But the evolutionist has many problems as well.
Dr. Gish, 1979. Most of the important geological formations of the Earth can be explained as having been formed as a result of the worldwide Noachian flood described in Genesis. The fossil record, rather than being a record of transformation, is a record of mass destruction, death by burial by water and its contained sediments. Morris, 1974. Visualize then a great hydraulic cataclysm bursting upon the present world with currents of water pouring perpetually from the skies and erupting continually from the Earth's crust all over the world for weeks on end until the entire globe was submerged. Similarly, these higher animals, land vertebrates, would tend to be found segregated vertically in the column in order of size and complexity because of the greater ability of the larger and more diversified animals to escape burial for longer periods of time. This means that the organisms represented in the fossil record must all have been living contemporaneously rather than scattered in separate time frames over millions of years. That is the alternative proposition to our evolutionary geological record.
A question for Dr. Emsley.
Our Declaration of Independence states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Our founding fathers felt that we had certain...
Do you have a question, please?
Yeah. Guaranteed, because they believe...
Could you please state your question?
Okay. How does evolution theory guarantee rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to those who are not the strongest and to those who are minorities and unable to survive.
Could you repeat the question, Mr. Ferris?
The question is, how does the theory of evolution create a worldview that produces human rights for minorities and others that are not able to survive?
I would answer it has nothing whatever to do with it, because evolution purely accounts for our physical presence on Earth at this time. The way we conduct our society is our choice. And when you come to talk about fitness, it isn't a question of pumping iron, it isn't a question of IQ. All sorts of different people have different degrees of fitness according to whatever environment they happen to be in, and it's society's job to make quite sure that everybody fits their particular niche to the best possible way. And so I'm afraid, to me, it is a non-question. You're talking about a sociological issue that has nothing whatever to do with evolution.
Well, of course, that is the present position of evolutionists and highly commendable, but certainly it was not in the times past. Darwin, Thomas Huxley, and the evolutionists, Sir Arthur Keith, men like that, Robert Broom, the evolutionists of the late 18th century, early 19th century, right on up almost to the present time, were all racist. They had to be. They believed that races were subspecies, and they made certain predictions. Of course, they always exalted the white race, naturally, being members of the white race. And the creationists have nothing to do with any such views whatsoever, because all men are created equal. Otherwise, we have to believe that they all evolved equal. And it's hard for an evolutionist to believe such a thing, because the races are subspecies, and must be some reason for it, you see. And so it's simply not socially or politically acceptable today. But let me just say that the creationists certainly believe we were all created. We have come from one parent. It is, I believe that scientifically. We could not know that, but certainly we were not the products of some survival of the fittest or something like that, but we were created equal.
We'll take the extra 20 seconds off of Dr. Gish's next answer. A question for Dr. Gish, and this will have to be the last one. My understanding is we have to finish at 4:30. All right, this will be the last question.
Dr. Gish, Dr. Emsley pointed out the theory of divergent evolution, in which there are similar structure for completely different function. I would ask the creationist theory to explain this other than development over time from a similar ancestor.
Mike, the sound reverberated around. I didn't understand the question.
I'm a lawyer, not a scientist. He's going to have to say it again.
Dr. Emsley pointed out the theory of divergent evolution, of the ideal of similar structure in creatures for completely different function. He named the presence of, like, the human arm has the same general structure as the bat wing. I would ask you to explain that in terms of creationism. Why, or what possible reason would there be for designing materials through designing structures by intelligent methods unless there was change over time?
Okay. Now I point out, first of all, the scientific evidence is contradictory to the evolutionary interpretation of that data. Very definitely contradictory. The creationist interpretation is this. If God created a four-legged amphibian, we'll say, then he wants to create a four-legged reptile. He used good, sound engineering principles in his design of the four-legged amphibian. Now when he goes to design a four-legged reptile, or a reptile, must he begin totally from scratch? Would he throw out everything he used or he knew in creating the four-legged reptile? No, he would build upon that. He would use the same good, sound engineering principle. We do that in all of our experiences. And certainly we should not tell God, hey, wait a minute now, the rat has a certain method by which he metabolizes sugar into carbon dioxide and water, about 70-some steps with enzymes involved. Now, when you're going to design a process in man for converting sugar into carbon dioxide. Well, you can't do that. You can't use that same process. No, 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 God, you can't do that. Why, it'd be very uneconomical and a waste of time. If he didn't, he used good, sound biochemical principles in designing the enzyme and all the intermediates. Why would he not use the very same process in man that he used in the rat? It works very well. We live in the same world. We drink the same water. We breathe the same air. We eat the same food. He would have to do it that way. You see, if we had a certain kind of amino acids, for example, in plants, then God used a different kind of amino acids in animals. Then he used a different kind of amino acids in humans. What would we eat? We couldn't eat plants.
Time.
We couldn't eat animals. We'd have to eat each other. And that's not a very good solution.
I think I will let Dr. Gish have the last word. Thank you. Nice.